That just leads me to welcome Emily to come to share Spirit, Strength and Hope for 15 or 20 minutes.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you. Hi everyone. So I'll start at the beginning, just trying to bear in mind what my sponsor advised me and suggested to also go, but generally where I was, what happened and where I am and who I am now. So as a child, my childhood actually was a really happy one. I was really fortunate in that respect. My parents did separate at the age of about 3.5 and then later on divorced and split, but didn't really have that much of a negative effect on me. But during my early childhood, I was quite hard work. I always like to get my brother into trouble. I got into trouble at school, disrupted classes, would climb trees, swim in the river naked, and some of the people would call my mum up and say, "Oh, I'm kicking her, do you know where your daughter is right now?" And just like to push boundaries, basically. And I just always wanted to just extract the most I could from life and be on stage, really. I was the first person, one of those kids that goes on the dance floor and then has to be dragged off at the end of the evening. I didn't sleep a night through until I was 2.5. And yeah, it was just generally quite hard work. I feel it's important to mention that even though I didn't start using drugs and alcohol up into my teens and later on in my teens, and that I would say that to become an alcoholic as such until my early 20s, that from a very young age I was always quite sexually aware, that I explored myself sexually from a very young age, and I don't ever remember not knowing about any of that stuff. And unfortunately, we had a friend of the family who took advantage of that. As to which way around that happened, I'm not sure, but I know that that's something that kept coming up in my life, and as to whether that was because I was trying to be something else, because it made me feel a certain way, it certainly did change the way I felt. So, stepping outside of my role as a child, somehow always wanted to be older or be different. I moved to a different country with my mum and my brother at the age of about almost 7. My dad stayed in Germany, and things continued. My life still at school. I did well. I had friends. I was social, but I was still, every now and then I would get into trouble. I was quite creative, a bit abstract. I think something that I've noticed throughout my childhood also is that I didn't struggle to have friends, but I never really belonged necessarily to any particular group of friends or type of. I was always like a little bit of everything. And as I've got older, that sort of always stayed with me. And I've got a puzzle piece incorporated into my tattoo, which sort of symbolises the fact that I felt like I fit in almost everywhere, but never 100% anywhere. That last little piece, that bit of puzzle that you just think kind of just doesn't fit in quite perfectly in any one place. And at the same time, that's sometimes my own doing, because I strive so much to be an individual that I've kind of put myself on the outside. And I think to some degree that's been my own doing. Anyway, fast forward a little bit into my teens. I then, when I was about 13, 14, ended up being diagnosed with anorexia nervosa and being in complete denial about it. It's the only other experience I've had in my life that I can compare to the compulsion I experienced with my alcoholism. Only it was the flip side, because I was depriving myself of something. Even though my head told me all I wanted to do was nourish myself and make and enjoy something that is just a basic human need, I could not prevent myself from starving myself and not allowing myself to have that. With the drinking, it was the opposite, so I couldn't stop putting something inside me that was actually a poison for me. And that crept up on me, and I was in a lot of denial about that. There was a lot of secrecy about that. I think there was, had some control over that situation. That went on to other eating disorders for the following 2 years, and it had an effect on me with my relationships, some degree in my friendships. I started trying alcohol and drugs at the age of, I think I first tried alcohol probably around the age of 12, 13. I had a couple of little blasts on it, but just on a couple of occasions. When I was about 15, 16, I started smoking weed, taking coke, trying ecstasy and MDMA and party drugs. At this point, I just became a bit of a weed smoker, really. My mum found some coke amongst my stuff in my wacky backy tin, as she called it, and she told my brother, who actually it turned out that he was dealing drugs on the side. He was actually making quite a lot of money doing this, and when he found out, he had to take me to one side and talk to me, and it's the first time, and I think I can't remember any time since I've actually seen my brother cry, because he was so worried about where this was going to go for me because of where it had led him, including the fact that he'd end up having some dealers actually around at the house, and my mum having to write a £12,000 cheque and having to remortgage the house in order to cover some of his debts. So naturally he was really worried about where my job use was going to take me. Over the following years, I had some struggles I tried lots of different jobs. Nothing really ever fit. I was always striving to have an appetite for an unconventional life. Really struggled with the whole 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, sort of, fat-free, sugar-free, life-free living. Just wanted something else, something a bit extraordinary. I wanted life to deliver. I found it unsatisfying. I wanted to find something that I knew that I was going to really enjoy and excel at. And I struggled with the relationships around me. I quite often would latch on to one person, or I would have quite a lot of males around me, and I really struggled to have women around me. Maybe more than one. I'd have like one female best friend, but then very much always have, be one of the guys. And it's funny, I looked through some pictures recently, and there's me, and then it's like 8-10 other guys, it's just me mixed in there. But perhaps I just felt safer with them. I don't know why that was exactly. But I think it's quite a common story, and it's something that in recovery I've heard over and over and over again, that it's quite a common trend that women find it quite unnatural and difficult to start being around women or having a group of women around them. They say stick with the women. It's like that's really difficult initially. But I'm managing to do that now, and I certainly wouldn't be without it. And it's not just one woman that I sort of just latch onto. Anyway, I had a couple of experiences and friendships that caused me to have some emotional breakdowns. I suffered from, after the eating disorder as well, bouts of depression, and just generally feeling very unease with myself, insecure. But at the same time, I took on as many roles when it came to doing plays or acting roles. I was in youth theatre all my life, really, and I actually did some paid work as well for acting. In those situations, I was taking on a role, and I felt far more comfortable in a role than I did necessarily just being myself. I also tried to be perfect or try to be better, and could never really necessarily just be content with being. I was in a long relationship with the man who's my son's father, which was very testing one, and it caused a lot of the friendships I did have to fall away, and then I ended up again putting all my energies into this relationship. So I was working, I was functioning, we smoked weed every day, every evening, drank, partied a bit. Anyway, fast forward a little way, our relationship, we had a child together. Our relationship did break down after a couple of years. We'd known each other for many years. And he became physically aggressive as well as emotionally. And so I ended that relationship. We decided to move out to a different area. So when he left, he really just abandoned his role as a father for quite some time. And I found myself in a completely different town, a little bit conservative. Again, I had this really strong sense that I just didn't quite fit in this place. But my will was like, no, I'm going to make this work. It's a nice area. We're going to stay here. The house rent is really good. I've got this child who's going to the local preschool. Trying to kind of be conventional and going against my own better instincts to move on, go to a different place, maybe even move back. To somewhere I'd been before where I had people around me. So I struggled. I had support network-wise. It didn't matter, as my son started to get a bit older, how many play dates I went on, or how many play groups I went to, or whatever. I just never managed to establish even one decent, strong friendship. And I suddenly felt, I didn't realise, and I denied entirely, I was actually quite lonely. And I had friends, but they were dotted around the country, and I never saw them regularly. As this time went on, my drinking of an evening with doing it whilst preparing a meal, or just as anybody generally would have some drinks in the evening, just increased basically over time. And my mum would step in and sometimes have my son, so during the weekends I could go and just really let my hair down, and I started going and enjoying myself, having a good time with my brother, who at this point was back at dealing again, so coke and weed, but he was now a much higher level. To the point I got a phone call from him once where he was saying, you know, sis, I've got to meet my partner. He's been given some information that's not right anyway. It's not looking good. Don't know how it's going to end. Worst case, might have my bollocks, whatever. And I remember just thinking, you know, I felt very, very hopeless. And actually, a few of these things happened with him, but none of it was enough to really to turn away from that sort of thing myself. Anyway, so these weekends sort of let me really let my hair down, and they crept into the Monday following the weekend, so then that crept into the rest of the week, and then, you know, a couple of glasses turn into a bottle turns into two, etc. You probably all know the story. Before you know it, you're on the hard stuff, and at inappropriate times of the day. I managed to get back into work and study. My son goes to school. I suddenly have all this opportunity to have people around me, make friends, have other mums in my local community. People know my face, they know my name. But at this point, I'm like this with everybody, just keeping them at arm's length, because at this point, my drinking career started. And I'm really not prepared for them to be aware of it. There's so much. I was a single parent, you know, there was the stigma attached to that, the shame, the guilt. And at that point, I was not prepared to stop. It was still something it fed me. It was my companion. It was my best friend. It made the mundanity of life kind of, I wouldn't say bearable, because I've always been kind of like to think quite a positive, optimistic person, but it made the mundanity of life, just took the edge off, made everything just a little bit more sparkly and a little bit more fun, and helped me to feel that I was experiencing life in a more interesting way. That maybe I myself became more entertaining, that I was able to tap into my creativity with it, that somehow I could channel what was kind of going through me. If I wanted to write music or write poetry, it was effortless and it just sort of reeled off and out of me, and that's something that I've really struggled initially with in earlier recovery, before the stage I am at now, to tap into without it triggering the urge or need to drink, fearing that maybe I was only capable of it whilst I was intoxicated. Maybe that's something that I am without. The drinking escalated. I decided that I'd have some low points. I went to local drug and alcohol misuse service, where they obviously took a referral from me, and I was completely honest and told them about my child. At this point, I remember after my first meeting feeling I was tempted to lie and not tell them about him, but I did. And obviously now children's services are involved, and I all of a sudden realised that my chances of ever wanting to foster or adopt a child, which was always part of my life plan, would be probably not possible. And as it was, I managed to get some little breaks from drinking under my belt, or I'd be able to fake it. And in all honesty, in 1 year, I could count on one hand the number of days I'd had off the sauce. We'd have the social worker in and out of our lives, but sometimes I'd always giving the impression, I could always make out quite well that I was doing all right, because I was still functioning, I was working, this and the other, and I would let people not see me on my worst days, or if I was having a bad day or a bad weekend, my mum would have my son and just look after him and step in. And but it just didn't get any better, to the point where my son ended up on the child in need register, and then shortly after that ended up, because due to the consequences, ended up on a child protection register, to the point where last year I stopped working. I went into full-time education thinking, right, I'm going to get on my career path, this'll do it, I know I'm going to follow this passion. And my drinking just got even greater because I wasn't working anymore. I went past a Lidl on the way home every day, went in there and got their cheapest bottle of gin. And so all in a very short space of time, I had to end my tenancy at the house that I was living at, where my rent got into arrears to the point I just couldn't recover from it. There were repairs that needed to be done. I had a drink driving incident that also involved where I caused a collision. So then I've been banned from driving and had to go on tag and on probation still for that. My son was no longer allowed to be in my care, so now he lives with his grandparents, bless his heart, who have special guardianship for him. I ended up in hospital a couple of times. And so I sat in front of my key worker last September, October, and he said to me, you know what, Emily, you're a good candidate for treatment, for residential treatment. And it was a bit of a blessing, really, because it's something that I hadn't really considered, but he said to me that at that point I'd been doing all the right things, and it turned out that there were about 7 people in the county that I used to live in that receive a placement for treatment in a year, and I happened to be one of them. And I'm just very, very grateful that I got the opportunity. Unfortunately, the few months leading up to me going into treatment, I was a bit lost. I was still drinking. I was on Librium half the time, trying to stop myself from drinking or cope with the withdrawal, or combining the two, which is not wise, and not communicating with my son's grandparents, and that not being very good. So throughout that period of me then in treatment and coming out, the last months of my recovery have been very much about improving that relationship with them, and me being able to own a few things and mend those relationships. One thing I can say now is, like, compared to before, when I would only be able to liberate myself from my secret of my secret and tell my truth to those around me when I was under the influence. So in that respect, alcohol served a purpose, because it made me be completely honest, because it made me feel despair. And whereas now, only yesterday I spoke to a really old friend of mine who knew I'd changed my lifestyle and this and the other, but he didn't know the whole truth of it. And I was able to sit there on the phone, we spoke for almost 2 hours, and talk to him and be completely honest, and didn't feel for 1 minute that I couldn't be completely honest with him about my truth. And for me, that was a bit of a milestone. Last Saturday I was able to pick up the phone and speak to my son's grandma, and just to have a chat and just to check in. And we've been away for 2 weeks. I had my son go to Germany with my dad and my brother. I had a 3-hour-long chat with my dad over there, just to pave the way for like a bit of amends. The rest will be in action. Little things are happening, big little things are happening in my life today. My relationship with my mother has improved vastly again. I manipulated the hell out of that woman and abused her. Well, not abused, but I took advantage of the amount of care that she offered with my son. And I have still an unbreakable bond. The 2 weeks with my son really cemented the fact that sometimes recently, a few months ago, I felt I had a peripheral role in his life, but I know that our bond is unbreakable, it's forever, and it's a very, very strong one. And that even once he glanced at me a little while back, when somebody made a strong statement, and that the fact he just looked at me sort of for approval, as if to say, is that right, Mum? That meant so much to me, because it meant that he still looks to me as that sort of figure in his life, and that but I can't deny that I've not always been the best, fullest version of myself as a parent, but that's absolutely what I'm striving to do. And when I think about me wanting to always strive for an unconventional life, or want to live an unconventional life, one that isn't normal and standard, well, actually, when I think about it, this is it. Because this is a bit of an unconventional life. Most people aren't in recovery and live the rest of their days, drug and alcohol free. And in that respect, I can teach my son by example, and I hope that one day he can learn more about our condition and about our illness and be proud and feel pride for me. And I try to include him as much as I can in my recovery. I am 8 months, almost 9 now, down the line. I'm not through the work yet. I'm taking my time with it. I've been quite slow with the process. I took a bit of time finding my sponsor also. I have a habit of sometimes overcomplicating things slightly, but I just feel that that's not necessarily what I was doing, but it wasn't until it felt right that I decided to go with my sponsor. And for now, I really feel like I've made absolutely the right decision, and I'm very happy where I am in my recovery right now. It doesn't mean that I don't face challenges or put myself in situations that I find challenging, but right now I do realise that I surround myself or put myself in environments that help me to resonate at a level where I feel at ease and at peace with myself. I pray, meditate every day. Thankfully, I have had a spiritual upbringing, so it's always nice just to return to a God of my understanding, to reconnect with my higher power. And I think that's been one of the greatest gifts, because if anybody said to me before meetings I struggled with, 12-step program, I didn't like the word program, and all this other stuff, but what I've realised is actually it's a spiritual program. And that's one of the greatest gifts I've got out of recovery and the fellowships. And just to end on the reading today in the quiet piece is actually titled Belonging. And when I was talking before about not necessarily fitting in anywhere particularly, me not necessarily knowing what kind of person I am in my identity or the way I dress differently, it doesn't matter. I'm a combination of all of them. And I've met people in my recovery who I may never have spent time with or got to know before, because we've all got this one thing in common, and it's one great empathy that we have with each other. Yeah, I'm very grateful for where I am today and for having the opportunity to share this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.